Thanks for coming out to another episode in HackDavis's workshop series. Like I mentioned earlier, today's will be on how to create an Android app using APIs. So a little bit of background about who I am. My name is Omid. I am a technical director here at HackDavis, and I have successfully built 2 Android apps in my past. One was for more personal usage, and one was something that I created for myself and a few friends to use to help us with some business that we were doing at the time. So let's start off with a little bit of background, just 2 or 3 minutes about what HackDavis actually is. So we are UC Davis's annual hackathon, and we usually host over 600 students every year. And the goal of our hackathons is to code for social good, in the sense that we want you to come here and build a project that can impact the world in some positive way. And we're very adamant about the fact that there is no experience necessary to come and participate in HackDavis. So even if you've never coded before, or you've never designed before, or you don't even know what an Android device is or anything like that, we welcome you to come and try HackDavis and try to create something for social good and gain some good computer science related skills. And any major is welcome. So some stats about how HackDavis looked last year. We had, like I mentioned earlier, over 600 total participants who submitted over 110 total social good projects. They were really, really good. And almost half of the people there, it was their first time there. So again, it's completely beginner friendly. And we had over 20 sponsors who raised over $63,000 for us as a whole, which enabled us to give out over $10,000 total in prizes. So lastly, I'm going to play for you guys a little video to help get you hyped about how HackDavis looked last year.
Might want to share computer audio so we can hear that too.
My bad. Okay, so that's what HackDavis 2020 looked like. Very exciting stuff. And if you guys are interested in joining us for HackDavis 2021, this year we'll be hosting it virtually for the first time over MLK weekend. And applications, if you're interested, will be opening up in mid-November. And you can check out hackdavis.io for more details, and we'll be updating that website in the coming weeks with more information about this year's hackathon. All right, so that is it for the introduction. So now let's get into actually creating an Android app. So the goals for today are to get the Android work development environment set up on your guys' computers or your laptops or whatever it is that you're using, and to help get you guys familiar with the very basics of the whole Android development environment. So like how to create a very basic UI and how to write some very basic Java to get some backend functionality. And our end goal from all of this is to build a very basic note-taking app for Android devices. And then at the end, we're also going to mix in a little bit of stuff about APIs. So we can teach you guys exactly how those work so you can have a good basic understanding. And then we're going to integrate that actually into our Android app. Okay, so that's our goals for today. And I'd also like to mention that we have breakout rooms available. So if you guys at any point in the workshop are confused or something just isn't working on your system, you are more than free to just hop into any one of those. And any of our technical directors will hop in with you and they'll try their best to help you out. Or if you guys have any questions, please feel more than free to either post about them in the chat or just unmute your mic and talk out loud. I don't mind being interrupted. All right, so let's get started with actually downloading the Android work environment for you guys. So there's 2 things that you're going to need to download. The first is Java. If you have coded and compiled a Java file on your computer in the past, you can ignore this step. But if you haven't, I am going to go ahead and paste this link in the chat for you guys. So feel free to go ahead to this website, and I'm going to show you guys exactly what to do when you get to this website right here. So our goal is to install Java SE11. So I'll give you guys a second to get on that. And once you're here on this website, you're just going to want to scroll right down until you see Java SE11 LTS, and then you're going to want to click on the JDK download. Okay, so you're going to come here and you're going to scroll down a little bit more, and you're going to see all of these different files to download. Just ignore everything here. Yeah, if you have SE15 downloaded, that's more than fine. Yeah. So if you don't have it downloaded yet, if you're on Mac, you're going to want to go to this Mac OS installer right here and click on this .dmg file. And if you're on Windows, you're going to want to go to this Windows x64 installer right here and click on this exe. And the one thing that sucks about Java is once you click on the file, they're going to ask you to like accept the terms of service, whatever. But when you try to download it, they're going to ask you to make an account, which is a little bit annoying. I already have an account, but really quickly, so you guys just need to click on create an account right here. It's a little bit stupid. They want your job title, your work phone number, and your company name. Feel free to just put NA for those, because there's really no reason to give them that information. They just kind of want it for no good reason. So feel free to just fill this stuff in, create your username and your email and your password. That's the only stuff that really matters here. Everything else can just be junk. And then once you finish that, you'll get an email confirmation. And then once you fill that out, you can actually download Java SE. Okay. So that's how we download Java. And if anyone has any questions about that, either hop into a breakout room if something's like wrong with your system, or just feel free to type anything in chat. Okay. And then after we get that done, I'm going to have you download something called Android Studio, and I will paste that link in chat for you right now as well. And if you feel like you're behind or anything right now, don't worry. I'm going to give you guys a lot of time to get all this stuff installed. So Android Studio is the IDE that we'll be using. I'll explain it more in a sec. I'll actually go through a lot of the features that it has. But the only thing to note when you download Android Studio is to go to that website. If you're a Windows user, at the very top, there'll be a download button for you. If you're a Mac user, you might have to scroll down. But you'll get a few prompts. I think there's like 6 or 7 in total when you're downloading. Just keep clicking next. Android's very good about having all of the pre-selected stuff being totally correct for you. You just want to keep clicking next until you get to the screen that says start a new Android Studio project. Once you get to a screen that has that somewhere towards the top of it, that's where you're going to stop. And don't close that screen, because that's a screen that we're going to start at when we start to make our actual project. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a minute to get all that stuff started, and then I'm going to talk while that stuff downloads. Yeah, so this meeting is actually being live streamed on YouTube right now. And after the meeting ends, we'll actually have that live stream posted. Yeah, and Ben has a link for you right there. Okay, so hopefully you guys are starting to get that stuff installed. The total installation time takes around 10 minutes, give or take. So I recommend you guys just have the installation screen up on your side so you can keep clicking next. Because while you guys do that, I'm just going to talk about some general introduction to mobile development stuff, so that you guys kind of have some context to what exactly it is that we're going to be doing today. Okay. So first, I'd like to talk about the different types of mobile development and kind of just how the whole world of everything looks in the mobile development sphere. So when people talk about developing mobile apps, they typically talk about doing it 2 ways. They either talk about developing native apps or hybrid apps. And I'm going to start with native apps. So what a native app is an app that's developed specifically for an Android device or specifically for an iOS device. So you can kind of think of it like a person who's making an app just for a Windows device or just for a Mac device, except the limitation is that you can only use the development kits specifically supported by Android and specifically supported by iOS. So that means that if you want to make an Android app, you have to download the Android development environment, which is exactly what you're downloading when you download it. Android Studio. And when you do that, you can only write in the programming languages Java or Kotlin. And if you don't know what Kotlin is, it's a language similar to Java. That's like a newer adaptation that Android's trying to push out. But for the sake of this workshop, we'll be using Java. And then if you want to develop an app for iOS, just like with Android, you have to download the iOS software development kit. And once you download that, you can only use 2 languages, Objective-C and Swift. Those are languages that you've probably never heard of or probably never used before if you're not in the mobile development sphere. You don't need to know them for the sake of this workshop. They're just Apple proprietary languages. And then when people talk about hybrid apps, they're talking about this kind of new generation of mobile app development where people try to write everything in one language so that it compiles for both systems, which if you've ever tried to create any desktop application, you know is a bit difficult because it's the same thing for Windows and Mac. Because to create one system that can work across multiple different platforms that have like entirely different like underlying bases of how they work is a little bit difficult. But currently the 2 biggest competitors in this sphere are Flutter, which is made by Google, conveniently the same people who maintain Android, and then React Native, which is maintained by Facebook. So these are 2 of the most popular. There are plenty of other cross-platform hybrid app tools that you can use. But the main reason why people use hybrid apps is obviously because you can write one stream of code and you can develop one UI and it works across multiple platforms. The drawback to this is that you don't get as many specific tools towards each device. So like the Android development library and the iOS development library have some like very specific niche tools that the other ones do not cover. So it's a little bit difficult to be able to work between them. And I see we have a question here, so I'll come back to this in 1 second. My user profile name on Windows has a space in it. It should not be a problem. I haven't encountered that before. Worst case, you'd have to uninstall, or if you'd like, you can choose a different path. Try maybe directly on your hard drive or something else like that to your C drive, not to your user folder. Maybe go to like your program files folder or something different like that. But I've never encountered that, but it shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, so back to hybrid apps. So like I was saying, the main reason why people use them is because it's easier. You write one stream of code, but the main disadvantage is that you don't get access to a lot of in-depth tools that Android and iOS specifically provide because it's very hard for Flutter and React Native to be able to do everything for you. Yeah, if there's any issues, you can reinstall it, but hopefully it works. So the reason why we're using a native app today and why we're specifically developing for Android is because Flutter and React Native, they're also not the most beginner friendly in the sense that Android and iOS development have been around since their phones came out. So like 12 plus years now, going on even more. So it's extremely easy to just look up an issue and Google it. It's not that difficult for hybrid apps either, but for the sake of being a really new beginner who doesn't know what's going on, in my opinion, personally, it's easier to pick up Android, both from a language standpoint and also because it's so easy to research any problems that might come your way. That's just what I've experienced. Everyone has their own differing opinion on if you should just start with developing hybrid apps or not. But for the sake of this workshop, we'll be doing an Android app. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about what Android development actually looks like. So I already mentioned that development on Android is limited to the 2 languages, Kotlin and Java. Kotlin is kind of like the new thing that Android is pushing for everyone to develop on. Syntactically, it's very similar to JavaScript, if anyone here has ever used that. If not, no worries. But as an underlying language, it's very similar to Java in the sense that you can also compile it by using Java. So like normally to use a language, you have to install like its compiler or something similar onto your computer. If you want to use Kotlin, all that you need to install is Java, which I had you guys install just a few moments ago. But like I said, we'll be using Java today. And the IDE that we'll be using is called Android Studio. The cool thing about Android is that you can use pretty much any IDE. But Android Studio is the official one, which means that it has a ton of more tools because it's actually maintained by Android that no other IDE can offer. So if you're talking about doing native Android development, I would highly recommend that you stick with using Android Studio after you watch this. And then I know I already mentioned why we're doing native app development specifically, but the reason why I chose Android development over iOS, for anyone who's curious, is because I personally find Android easier to pick up because a lot of people have used Java or a language extremely similar like C++. You can only use Swift or Objective-C, which I find to be a tiny bit harder to pick up if you're doing iOS development. It's also a much more open system. If you've ever tried to do any Apple development, you will know that the only way to do iOS development is if you have a Mac. So Windows users can physically not develop iOS apps, which is very cool on Apple's part. I've also found that there's a little bit more support for Android. Yeah, so Android, because it's been around longer and because it's been very consistent in the way that it's used Java pretty much since its birth, there's just more online support that's garnered up over the years. So if you Google an issue, you'll find a lot more Stack Overflows and things like that. All right, so now it's time for us to build. I'm not sure if you guys have finished installing everything yet. I'm not sure exactly how long it's been, but I'm going to give you guys a few more minutes. So we're going to take like a 2 to 3 minute break here. During this time, feel free to ask any questions in the chat. If you're having any installation issues, feel free to speak up as well. When we download Android Studio, it asks to import Android Studio settings. I believe that it defaults to not importing, and you should stick with that. You do not want to import. The reason why it asks that is because it thinks that you might have installed it in the past and you want to import your preferences. So just select do not import. Yep. And I'll give you guys about 2 or 3 more minutes. And just a heads up that even when I start talking, if you guys aren't done installing, it's no worries at all, because I'm going to spend like 10 or 15 minutes just going over what the interface looks like. So you're not going to miss out on any code or anything. So don't stress out.
I have a question. So I downloaded Java twice already, but I can't find it on the Launchpad. I have a Mac.
You shouldn't actually need to open up Java. Just having it installed is good enough. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, sorry, I should have specified that. Yeah, so the purpose of downloading Java, just so you can get some context to it, is that Android Studio knows where to locate it, so it can compile your Java code. You don't actually have to do anything with the Java once you download it. That's my bad. I'll give you guys, we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule here, so I'll give you guys about 2 more minutes, and then I'll get started explaining how Android Studio looks. I'm not sure if that question was directed to me, but I guess since we're sitting here, I'll explain what I've built to give people some context. So one app that I built was for me and a few friends. Essentially what it was, if anyone here has heard of reselling, I used to resell shoes and clothes and a lot of that stuff, like Supreme, Yeezy, all that good stuff. And back when the community was much smaller and there were no like big apps or anything to do anything, I created an app that allowed you to easily log and track your sales, basically like a spreadsheeter, but much more intuitive and simple. I used like some data structures on the back end. I connected it to Google Firebase. For those who don't know, that's like a really simple databasing like server that you can use. And I shared the app with a few friends. It was in its very early stages, and I decided to nix the project because I had other stuff to focus on at the time. And like 6 months ago, someone published the same thing, like the same idea, and they just raised like $2 million in funding. So yeah. So the moral of the story is that if you have a good idea, make an Android app. Shoot my shot. Okay. Thanks, Angie. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start showing you guys how Android Studio looks. Is there anyone who has not finished the installation for Android Studio yet? I just want to get a head count before I start. If you haven't, feel free to type in the chat. All right, I'll take the deafening silence as we're all done. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to my desktop here. And all of you guys should have a screen that is only for first-time users. So I can't actually show you what it looks like. And I apologize if this is a little bit small. It'll get bigger. But you should have a screen that has like a few options in like in like one column. And one of them should be like start a new Android Studio project or like create a new project, something along those lines. It has a plus button next to it. You're going to want to click that one. And you'll know that you click the right one if your screen looks just like mine. So go ahead and click that. And then once you click that, you should be at this screen now. And you're going to want to click on Empty Activity. And I will explain what this means once we get inside of Android Studio. But essentially, you are creating a blank starter project. And the cool thing about it is that Android provides you all of these starter projects, some of them with stuff already built in. Like you can start one that like already has Google Maps. We're not going to be doing that today, but we're going to be choosing Empty Activity again. So then you're going to want to click Next, and you're going to see a bunch of information pop up here. When I click Create, it's oh, okay. Android SDK is missing or corrupted. Interesting. At what point is there a create button? Do you mean like at the very beginning screen when you were trying to get to this screen that I'm sitting on right now? Okay, that is most likely an issue with your actual installation. Because the Android SDK is what comes with Android Studio. Unless you mistakenly clicked off of any of their pre-recommended settings, I'm not exactly sure why that would happen. The best thing that I can tell you is to uninstall and to reinstall. I'm not too sure. Let me double check really quickly for you, but well, that's not the right one. Yeah, I'm not too sure. I've never encountered that issue myself. The best thing I can say for you to do before you uninstall and reinstall is to hop into a breakout room. And this option, again, is open to anybody. Feel free to hop into a breakout room, and one of our tech team members will follow you in there, and they can take a look at what the error means more specifically, because there might be a better solution than just uninstalling and reinstalling it. Yep, no worries. And we're going to be talking here for like 10, 15 minutes, so you're not going to miss any code or anything, so don't worry. Okay, so to get back in, we're going to want to click on Empty Activity, and then you guys should have a bunch of stuff that pops up right here. Again, I'm sorry that it's small. I can't really change this. It'll get bigger soon. So what you guys are going to want to do, sitting on this screen right here, the main field that you should be concerned about is this name right here. And all that this is naming your actual Android app. So I'm going to name mine Basic Note-Taking App. You can name yours anything you want. And you're going to see a few fields automatically change when you type that. This thing right here is a package name. You don't have to worry too much about what this means, but essentially, when you publish your app, all of your files are stored inside of a package. That's the basis of it. That's just like, it's kind of a Java feature, if you will. And then this is your save location. So it's where your actual file is being saved. If you'd like to change it, feel free. And then right here, language. I believe that Kotlin is auto-selected, which is more proof that Android is trying to get you to use it. But fear not, feel free to click on the dropdown and you can click on Java. And then right here under minimum SDK, you should have API 16 auto-selected. You might have something different. No worries, just click the dropdown. And again, we're going to want to click on API 21. And to give you some context as to what that actually means, APIs are essentially a minimum level where essentially each version of Android that is published has an API level that it can go down to. So when you say API 21, you're saying that like every device produced in like the last like 7 or 8 years has an Android version high enough that it can support an API level of 21 or higher. And the reason why I chose 21, and probably why you should choose 21 for any projects that you make, is because 21 was the last real version that had like some huge optimization improvements. So your apps will compile and they will run much faster if you select API 21. And obviously you get more benefits the lower that you go, but also the less devices that you can support. So it's a trade-off. We're just going to be doing API 21, and you're going to want to click Finish right now. And let me bring this over here. That doesn't look nice. Let me increase the font size for all you guys so you can actually see. All right. So now in your bottom right, you should see some like stuff going on about like initializing or some message. That's what you want to happen. And then probably in about 2 or 3 minutes, you're going to get a pop-up saying that some like Gradle build is loading or something similar. And then after that, you should be looking at the exact same thing that I am. Just don't touch Android Studio for about 2 to 3 minutes. Let that all take place. The reason why mine is not doing that is because once you do it once, the second time takes like several seconds because Android knows how to optimize stuff with their IDE, which is again another reason why we like using it. So yeah, just let that stuff play out. And while that stuff is playing out, you can watch my screen because you're not going to need to touch your IDE actually for another few minutes. So I'm going to zoom in here so you guys can see what's going on. So the first thing that I'm going to do is introduce you to like the structure of the IDE so you guys actually can understand like what it is that you're actually looking at. Because I want you guys to take away from this not just how to create a basic note-taking app, but some skills that you can use to actually create your own Android apps, or maybe take these skills and create an iOS app down the line. So right here, we're going to start with your basic file structure. So you have 2 main folders. One is called your app folder, and one is called your Gradle Scripts folder. So I'm going to start with this app folder right here. And inside of your app folder is where all of your source code and all of your UIs go. So for however many different screens that you have on your app, all of the code that powers behind them, all of those things will go inside of the app folder. And this is where you do about 99.9% of your work, okay? And I'll explain what Gradle Scripts is in just a second. But the first folder that I'd like to take a look at is the Java folder and the Res folder. These are the 2 folders that you'll be doing most of your work in inside of the app folder, okay? And the Java folder is pretty self-explanatory. It's where your Java code goes. And I'll explain what that does a little bit later down the line. But inside of your Res folder, Res is short for resources. And this is essentially where any UI components that you're going to go about making during the duration of your app will go inside of this folder. And you have several subfolders inside of them. And I'm not going to explain what every folder means. You can look those up whenever you have a need to access them. But the main ones that we'll be working with are the layout folder, which is where you create your actual UIs. So if you have a home screen, you'd have one file in here for the home screen. If you had a settings screen, you have another file in here for the settings screen. So you design and make some separate UIs for those 2. And then these other ones are, like I said, ones that you can research for yourself later if you ever need to use them. But most of the time, you'll be inside of the layout folder. And then going back to the Java folder where you write your actual code. So on that UI, let's say that you like click a button, right? When you click that button, something in the background has to happen because you touch the UI, but now something in the background has to compute. So like we're making a note-taking app. What do you think happens when you click the save button? Some code in the background has to do some process to actually save your code, right? So when that happens, it goes inside of the Java folder. And then you'll notice here that this is actually the package name that I briefly mentioned earlier. These bottom 2 folders you can completely ignore. You shouldn't ever be writing code in them, at least for a beginner. And then you're going to want to click this top folder, and inside of here is where all of your Java code files are. So we have one that's auto-generated for us. And I'll explain what all this code means when the time comes. But essentially, when you click that finish button, this is where your app goes to and says, hey guys, where in this code should I go to figure out what I should do when the save button is clicked? And then it'll find the Java code, and then it'll say, okay, I need to save it using this and blah, blah, blah. So this is where all of that code actually exists. Okay. And then lastly, inside of this manifest folder, this is called the manifest file. This is very important, and you should be very careful when you edit it. The role of this file is essentially it's a place for you to describe essential information about the app. So like what the app's icon should be, like when you're staring at the home screen of your device, or what the app's label should be, what its full icon should be, what its color theme should be, things like that. And then this is also a place where you can request permissions. So sometimes you guys would have noticed whenever you launch an app, it says, hey, this app wants to use your location, or hey, this app wants access to the internet. This is where you would declare those intents to do that. And I'll actually show you guys how to do that later on once we start talking about APIs. Okay. And then very lastly, we have this Gradle Scripts folder right here. And you'll work in this very minimally. The purpose of a Gradle Scripts folder is essentially to act like a build system. So using this, Android kind of knows how to match together your UI files alongside your Java code, and it knows how to kind of merge them together and how to create one usable app on your mobile device. And then some of these files in here also do other features, like if you want to import a library that doesn't exist inside of the Android SDK, or if you want to like change that minimum API thing that we were looking at, you can also go in there. A bunch of little things like that. And I'll show you guys what one of the files looks once the time comes a little bit later today. Okay. But we are now ready to actually begin creating our own apps. So I'm going to give you guys about 1 or 2 minutes just to take a quick break and just to get ready. Hopefully your Android Studio should be done by now, and you should probably be looking at this at the same file that I'm looking at right now. If not, feel free to type in the chat, and again, we can help you out. But yeah, you guys should be pretty close to being ready by now. Yes, it should. If you did everything correctly, the code should be similar to yours. You might have something up here that's hidden. But yes, the code should be identical. Does yours have something different, or were you just checking? Huh. You did choose Java, right, when you created it? Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, your code should look exactly like mine, so delete anything that's not here. And if you'd like, I can just copy paste this raw code for you. Okay, sure, I'll copy paste this for you. The formatting might be off, but yeah, the one thing is that the very top line where the package is, you're going to want to replace what I put as your app name here with whatever your app name is, with no spaces. It's like, and no capitalizations. Like I named mine like basic note-taking app. Yours should have no spaces and no capitalization. So whatever you named yours, put that right there. You joined a little bit late, so you missed the front part. What are the steps to get to this screen? Okay, have you downloaded Java or Android Studio? Sounding right now. Okay, so once you have Android Studio and Java completely installed, these steps are very simple. So you're gonna have a little screen that pops up. Yeah, no worries. So you'll have a little screen that pops up that says create a new app. And on that screen, you're going to want to click create a new app, that option, and then you're going to see a few things pop up. You're going to want to choose empty activity, and then you're going to want to choose your app's name, and you're going to want to choose its language. Very simple stuff. I'll type it out for you just in case you forget what I said. All right, so unless anyone else has any other questions, I'm going to start designing a UI for you guys. So the main thing that I like to do first when I create my Android app is I actually like to create a UI before I really write any code. And even if it's a very basic UI, it doesn't have to look pretty or anything like that. I just like to have something that I can go off of so that like I kind of know what code I'm writing and what it connects to on my front end. So you guys are going to want to open up this activity_main.xml file right here. And there's a chance that your file might look like mine, where it's a bunch of weird looking text that you have no idea what any of it means. If it does, in the right upper hand corner, there will be a button called design. You're going to want to click on that. Okay. And this is the beautiful thing about Android and Android Studio. It's that they let you create an entire UI using drag and drop. So in theory, you can create a full-fledged UI without ever writing a piece of code to create that UI. Because all you can do is just drag elements onto your UI and just like move them around and fixate them in the exact locations that you want, and you never have to touch code once. I should say before we begin that there is underlying code whenever you drag and drop stuff. So you'll see that Android should have given you this little hello world element right here. And this hello world element that they gave you actually has underlying code. So if we go back for a second and we click on this code button right here, we'll see that this thing that we created has this block of code connected to it. Now, for the purpose of this workshop, I'm not going to teach you what this means because it's a little bit complicated. But what you just need to know is that this is an XML file. XML stands for Extensive Markup Language. So whenever you put something on here, there is underlying code that happens in the background. How do I switch to code? In the upper right-hand corner, you should have this button right here called Design, which you should have selected right now. Right next to it, there's a split in a code. Click on Code. Yeah, so this is your code. This is what's underlying changing whenever you do something in your drag and drop UI builder. But you don't need to know how to write or edit that code for the sake of this workshop because it is a little bit advanced. But if you'd like to look into it, it's not the hardest thing to pick up. So you can just do some easy research, like look up like XML Android. And I think I actually have a resource that I'll be sharing with you guys at the very end of this guide on how to learn basic XML. So now we're going to go ahead and create our actual UI. So you guys will have two screens here. This blue one on the right and this white one on the left. And you pretty much only care about this one on the left. The point of this right one is just to give you a blank background so you can more easily see how all of your components look. But you can pretty much ignore that for the sake of this workshop because our UI is not going to be super complicated. You don't need to really care much. So you're going to want to select by clicking on this hello world thing right here and just hit your delete key and it should be gone. So bye-bye, it's gone. Now, when we create a note-taking app, there's a few things that we need to think about having, right? We need to have a title to welcome people to the app. And then we need to accept a title for whatever it is that their note is. And then we need the actual body or the actual content of that note, right? And then we need some way to display that note. So the way that you would go about doing that in Android is you have this whole entire list here in this left-hand side thing called a palette. And in this palette, there's a bunch of pre-built UI components that Android provides for you that you can use to create the UI for your app. So we had a text view that said hello world. And what a text view is just a basic way of showing text. Think of it like a text box if you're working in like MS Paint or something like that, right? So we're going to create a text view to just tell people welcome to our app. We don't need to edit the text or anything like that. It just needs to be static text that tells people welcome to the app. And the way that we do that is we select this with a left click of your mouse and you just drag it right onto the UI right here. Okay. And we're going to put it right here at the top. And you're going to notice a little red thing right here with a little error. And I'll explain how to fix that in just 1 second. Don't worry, it doesn't mean that you did something wrong. Okay. So if I can explain really quickly, when you actually left click on this, you're going to see some stuff pop up in this right-hand folder called attributes. And what this really means is that every single element that you create has some underlying attributes. So like, for example, a text view has like font size or like font color or like font alignment, right? And in order to change those, you can do one of two things. You can go into the XML and change it yourself, which is like I mentioned, the thing that is created whenever you create the text view, or you can save yourself that hassle if what you're doing is relatively basic, and you can just change it right here. And you have some drop-down folders. The two main ones that, well, actually, all of these are important, but the ones that we'll be focusing on right now, the very first thing right here is ID. So what this is, you can think of it like a variable name. So like your text view, like this block of text is a variable. So we're going to change its ID to be welcome message because as is a good rule in all of computer science, your variable name should be self-explanatory. You don't want a variable name that says text view because that tells the programmer literally nothing. So we're going to make ours welcome message. And then down here, we have declared attributes and we have common attributes, okay? And these both contain some very basic, like the most needed attributes that you would need to be able to edit to be able to edit your particular component. And these change based on which one you drag in. And Android has already predetermined which ones should pop up here. So like, for example, right here, we have text. All that means is like what text should show up. And like, we want our text to say, welcome to my note-taking app. You can put anything here that you'd like, but I'm going to say, welcome to my note-taking app. But this text looks kind of ugly, right? So we want to change its text appearance. So you have this text appearance thing right here, and you have a bunch of predetermined font sizes, weights, and font families that you can choose from right here. We're just going to choose large. You can instantly see how nice my thing looks, but it's like half off the screen. So we're going to want to drag this back over with a simple left click, and now it's centered. But now it's time to get rid of that error. So what this error is right here is that it's a constraint error. And what constraint means is that whenever you drop something onto your UI, you need to hold it into place, right? But to hold it into place is a little bit difficult because everyone has different sized Android screens. Like a Samsung Galaxy S20 is a way different size than a Google Pixel 3a. So to get everything to look the same between different devices of different screen sizes, you can constrain stuff to each other. So like, for example, these 4 borders, I can constrain this thing right here to hold it up to it. And if that sounds a little bit confusing, don't worry. Constraints are a little bit weird to wrap your head around because you've probably never seen anything like it before. And that's why Android actually gives you this blue thing right here. It's right next to this red thing. It's called Infer Constraints. So Android kind of assumes, based on where your text view or whatever element that you're working with is, where you want it to constrain to, so that your element stays in the exact same place. So all I'm going to do is click this and see my element is in the exact same place, but now it looks like this. That's pretty cool. And you can do that for any element, but a word of advice, and we're actually going to see this in a little bit. If you just click Infer Constraint every time, sometimes Android, because it's not a perfect system, will infer wrong and it will mess up your UI. And you can just Control-Z and go back. So like it's not like the biggest of concerns, but it should be noted that you need to learn how to actually place your own constraints. Just relying on this is not a very healthy habit. So now I'm going to show you guys how to actually place them yourselves. So the next thing that we need is a way to actually get the input from the user on what their note title is and what their note description is, right? You see that I have all these pre-selected categories right here. And because I want to get some text from the user, I'm going to infer that I want to click on text. And then I'm just going to tell you in advance that you want to scroll all the way down and you're going to see something called text input layout. It's a little bit poorly named, but essentially all it is like a text box for users to type in. I don't know why they named it like that, but it is what it is. And you're going to want to click this download button right here. You may or may not have this. Some systems don't. I can never figure out why, but you're just going to click that and then click OK. All that is downloading the particular component. And then your console is going to pop up and your UI is going to break. Just click the collapse button, and then everything should return back to normal. Okay. And again, just a quick reminder, if any of this is confusing, doesn't make sense, or you have a question, feel free to type in chat. All right. So now we're going to drag a text input layout onto here. And it's going to go right there. And once again, the error is here. So before we do anything, and this is kind of how I like to do things, before I even mess with my thing, I like to constrain it and size it just how I want it to be. So again, we could click Infer Constraints if we wanted to, but it's not good practice. So what I'm going to do is, you guys see these 4 little things right here, not in the corners to resize, but these 4 things right here to actually, these are actually built to constrain your component. So I'm going to click this left thing right here, and I'm just going to drag my mouse past the left of this screen, and it's going to automatically make a constraint on the left. So now the left side of this text input layout component is now being held up by the left side of the app screen. So you can almost think of it like a support beam, I guess, in a way. And then I'm going to click this top one, and I have 2 options. I have the one that I just did where I clicked on this and I just dragged it up and I connected it to this. So that means that I constrained it to the upper side of this welcome to my note-taking app thing. Or you can go all the way up here, but we don't want to do that because we want to stack our stuff nicely, right? And then you're going to want to do the same thing for the right side. And then for the bottom, we're also going to want to constrain to the bottom. And now we see our things in the middle. That's not cool. So now you can just easily drag it up and the constraints stay. And just like that, we have an input field. Now, I'm just going to tell you guys in advance, I'm not going to explain how all of this stuff works because then we'd never leave. But a hint is essentially that tells you like what you want the user to put into here. So I'm going to change my hint to be title. And now I have a thing here saying to the user, hey, please input your title. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this exact same process over again. I'm going to create another text input layout. And I'm going to constrain its upper side to the upper side of that. And sometimes the UI glitches out like that. That's just how the drag and drop UI works. Could you go to the top or the bottom of the welcome message? You're going to want to select bottom. Yeah, and what that's asking you is, do you want to constrain like to the top, which means your thing's going to go through it, or to the bottom? So yeah, it's if you're below something, you generally want to click bottom. It's a good rule of thumb. Just came. What did I miss? We're making an Android app. If you'd like, I can link you the download links to both Java and Android Studio. I'm going over the basics of how to create an Android app, and then later on we're going to talk about the basics of how APIs work. Right now, I haven't gone into any code stuff yet. I'm just showing them how to create a UI. And by no means you have to code along with me. You can just watch and soak in the knowledge if you'd like. So yeah, I made this second one right here, and I'm going to want to constrain to the bottom again, and then constrain to the sides again. And once again, this looks really ugly, so I'm going to drag it up here. Okay. I'm going to change my hint for this to be, let's say the body, because I want to get the body of the note. So now I have a title to my note and a body to my note. And it's, did I not constrain this? Oh, geez, I messed this up. Okay, I messed it up a little bit. Download Java Android Studio. Okay. So if you were following along with me right there, you might have had a little glitch, and that was because I wasn't paying attention. So to start over, we're going to go back, and we created 2 of these, right? And this is actually a good learning moment. When you create a text input layout, it creates underneath it something called a text input edit text. So the layout is just a general wrapper for the actual field that you type your text into, right? So when I was constraining the box, but I wasn't constraining the wrapper around it, which caused obvious problems. So I want to constrain my box. And I just deleted it. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to click the Infer Constraints. And this is why sometimes you like using Infer Constraints, because it's just smarter and it knows exactly where to go. So now everything is fully constrained. So again, just to recap, you just click the text input layout, you drag it onto the screen, you place it where you like, and you click Infer Constraints. And it's generally not good practice. I'm a little bit rusty on my constraining skills, so that's why that happened. It's good to read up on constraints and how they work. But for the time being, you can just use Infer Constraints. Okay. So that is good for that. Now we're going to actually run our app, and we're going to see the UI that we just actually, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting something here. We also want a button, obviously, because we need a way to actually save our note. So we're going to go back to common here because button is a very common layout component. We're just going to drag one out right here. And you're going to place it wherever you like. And we're going to go here to our common attributes. And again, you have a whole list that Android generates for you based on what component it is that you happen to click. And we're going to change our text. And we're going to change this to finish. Yeah, that sounds good. And then now I'm going to auto constrain mine. And now our finish button is automatically constrained. And now one more thing before we run, we need to go back and we need to set our variable names or our IDs. Because when we go and reference these in the code, like I mentioned earlier, it's a variable name at the end of the day, and you need a self-explanatory variable name. So for our top text input layout, whatever yours says up here, just click on your top one right up here. Actually, I'm sorry, click on the text input layout inside of your component tree. So you'll see something with like a little sidebar next to it. You're going to want to click the top one. Do not click the bottom one. Click the top one. And then I'm going to change the name of this to be title input. And it's going to ask you to update all usages of it. This just means, do you want it to update the XML code? And you're just going to want to click yes. And then we're going to click the exact same thing up here for your second one. I'm going to change this to body input. And we're going to want to click yes again. Okay. And my hints didn't update, so I'm going to go back and change those, but you guys should already have those. Okay. So now we have a fully functional UI, and this is very simple. As you guys saw, it took us, I wasn't timing it, but I'd say about 10 minutes. And the more that you get familiar with this, you can create fairly complex UIs in just a few minutes. And obviously, like I said, eventually you'll want to learn XML so you can do more in-depth customizations. But for a beginner, this is very good, and you can create something like this very quickly. So I want to run our actual creation. And in order to run it, we're going to want to click this run button up here. And you'll have a bunch of options up here, but clicking the run will not work just yet. So you'll see we have a compile button to compile our code. And then you should have something right here. This varies based on device. And this is the one place where Android Studio comes in a bit lackluster. So Android Studio comes with a feature where you can run your app, and instead of having to like plug in like your Android, you guys can see that. Instead of having to plug in your Android device, like I have one, which you can do, you can plug this in via a USB and install the app onto your phone and run it. They actually have something called an emulator. And if you've never used one before, essentially what it is it downloads an actual Android OS phone onto your computer, and you can run the app through that OS on your computer, which is really, really cool. And it makes debugging and just checking out your app really simple. So in this dropdown right here, you're going to want to click this open. And you guys might have, let me close that so you guys don't see what I'm seeing here. You guys should have a list of available devices. For some of you, this might not be a thing. And if it's not a thing, I'm going to show you how to create a device. But some of you should already have one, which means you're like 99% of the way there. So if you have one, like I have one that says Pixel 3 API 30, just click on that. Okay, but if you don't have that, you're going to want to follow me for a second. So you're going to want to click on Open AVD Manager. And you're going to get this nice pop-up right here. And essentially what we have to do right now is we have to create our own virtual device that has this emulator on it. So you should see nothing right here. If you do see something right here, then go back and select that from the dropdown. But if you don't, click on Create Virtual Device. Okay, and then you should have a bunch of phone options that pop up. It doesn't matter what you choose, just choose Pixel 3a because it's a small device. And then you're going to want to click on Next. And then you should have a list of things down here. I'm not going to bother explaining what they are because it's a little bit over the head for everyone, but you're just going to want to click on the download button that's right next to the R. And you're essentially just downloading the OS onto your device or onto your computer. And then once that is done downloading, you'll want to click the next button. And then all that you do is you name your device. So I name this my Pixel 3a, right? And then you click finish and it'll go through some computing and it'll actually make the device for you. Okay. And that's how you create a virtual device on Android. That installation should take you anywhere from like 1 to 5 minutes, depending on how fast your computer and your internet is. But a word of advice, and this is, like I mentioned earlier, the one place where Android is kind of lackluster. For a select number of you, you might get an error when you're trying to actually download the, when you click download next to R, or even somewhere before there, you might get a pop-up error. And that error should say something about visualization technology. It'll be a weird looking error code. And if you get that error code, what that essentially means is that your computer does not have like the certain visualization technology enabled to be able to run Android's emulator on it. Now you can get it to run by going into the BIOS and just changing like one setting on your computer, but not everyone knows how to do that. And going into your BIOS can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So if that error comes up, Unfortunately, it's a little bit hard for you to run the emulator along with me. If you'd like us to help you debug that issue, we'll be here after the workshop ends, and we're more than happy to look at what the error is for you and help guide you through it. But it's not something that we can really do on the fly. You're also more than welcome to hop into a breakout room if you'd like to get it solved right now. But if you can't, but if you have that error right now, I would highly recommend that you just sit here and watch me do this and make your UI like I am and write the code like I am. But don't actually, but you just can actually run it on your own device. But as long as you're gaining the knowledge that I'm trying to share with you and you're actually copying down the code, you should be good enough for the time being. Okay. So I'm going to take about a 2-minute break, give the people who are installing the Android virtual device onto their machine a chance to install it. And if anyone needs a stretch break or anything like that, feel free to take one. And once we see our working UI, we are going to go ahead and actually start writing some code. You have a drop down under them, but that's not how they show up in yours. Interesting. Okay. Bring this over here. I don't know what I clicked to cause that, but okay. So your body input. So do you not have a drop down at all? Do you have all 4 of these elements, or do you just have this body input and you just have this title input? Like there's no drop down, there's no other elements at all?
So there's no drop down, but they show up as individual like elements. So I have the text input, edit text and stuff, but they're also like named differently because when I tried to rename it to what you had, it said it already exists, so it wouldn't rename it that way.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that was actually the initial error that I made. So what you'll want to do, okay, yours as well. Okay, so the basic way to fix that is to click on all 4 of those individual elements, and they will pop up somewhere on your screen. Because what happened is, if you were following me, I disconnected them, which you're not supposed to do. So click on each one, and then whenever they pop up, just click on them again in the view, and literally just click your backspace button, and you can delete them. And you can go ahead and do that for all 4 of them.
Okay.
Yeah. And then once those are deleted, I'll show you what to do next.
Okay, one sec. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I deleted them.
Okay, sick. So now what you want to do is you want to go back to your text, back to this text input layout right here. And I'll make 2 more so you can follow along with me. So put them in wherever you'd like on your screen. I'm going to put mine a little bit down here. Okay. And create both of them first. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that they actually have these shelves underneath them. And then once you see that they have them, click on the top shelf. So the thing that says text input layout.
Okay.
And then once you click on that, just click this blue button that says Infer Constraints. And then it'll automatically do your constraints for you, and you'll essentially be done.
It doesn't do it like for the bottom constraint. Is that a thing or?
Yeah, so this is again why I say that if you're interested in learning more about constraints, it's best to do your research because they're a little bit finicky in how they work. But the generality of it is that you only need to be constrained to one side. So in theory, all that you need is like a left and a top constraint, and you're constrained enough. But the physics of it is a little bit more wonky than that if you read into it. But that's the generality of it. So yeah, it's completely stable for the sake of doing this.
Okay. Okay, and is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So what's like the point of having this layout and the edit text separate?
So that's an Android quirk, and essentially what that is that they have this wrapper. So because they're taking input from you, and the reason why it's happening is because they're looking for input, they need a wrapper to locate where the input is going. And then you'll notice that there's like a little square inside of it. If you look really closely, inside of that wrapper is a place to handle the actual input of the text. Because handling input of text is a little bit too complicated for one specific element. So they break it out into two. Yeah, and you'll see a few other ones like that, namely ones that search for input. But regular stuff like a welcome message, there's just one. Yeah, so that is it for that. So now we're going to go ahead and actually run our app. So hopefully you guys have your AVDs installed. Again, if you weren't able to get yours installed, I'm sorry about that. You can still code along with me. Before I press start, when I drag the second box up using Infer Constraint, the drop-down disappears. Yeah, so the reason why that happened is probably because you had the thing underneath it selected. And if you drag that up, it separates them. So before you do any dragging, what I would recommend is that you click on the top, on the uppermost one. So like for me, I would click on body input, not text input edit text. I would click on body input, and then I would drag up. See, because when I dragged it up right there, nothing got disconnected. I'm not going to disconnect mine again because I want to move on. But if you were to drag this up, it would disconnect. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and press play here. Hopefully this works for everyone else. And when you press play, it's going to take about 2 to 3 minutes to actually pop up. Mine pops up almost instantly. And the reason for that is because I already have the app installed, but you are essentially doing a cold boot on a phone, and then you have to install an app. So it's going to take you about 2 to 3 minutes to get to where I am. But at the end, we should have this, and I'll show you guys the functionality on my screen. We created an actual input, so we can make my first note. That's how you spell note. And then we can make a body for our note. So I say, buy eggs and buy milk. So essentially, we created this UI. We spent a little bit waiting and doing some error checking, but it only took us like 5 to 10 minutes. And that's the beauty about Android's drag and drop UI. It's that once you kind of get the hang of things and you learn more about how constraints work, it's a really easy process. So I'll give you guys a minute or two to actually get your things going. And while we're waiting here, I'm just going to briefly point something out, and it's that if we click the finish button, nothing happens. And I briefly explained why this was a little bit ago, but it's because when you click the finish button, your code, because this is a button, your XML and your UI, the way that the app is put together, your UI says, okay, he clicked the finish button. And then that signals your Java code to say, oh, when finish button is clicked, execute this block of code. But we have not defined a block of code to be executed when the finish button is clicked. So that's why that happens. And that's what we're actually about to go and solve right now. So we're gonna go ahead now and actually get started with that. Hopefully everybody is able to have their device here, or it's still booting up. If it's still booting up, no worries. And this is the one time and the one time only that we're going to edit the XML. I know I said that you usually don't want to edit it, but you do have to edit it if you want your button to have an on-click method. And an on-click method does exactly what I just talked about. It says, okay, when this button is clicked, find this function in our Java code, okay? So we need to click on code here. Again, it's in the upper right if you missed it before. And this takes you to a huge block of XML. If you did it right, your lines should be somewhat similar to mine, about 65 lines worth of code. Okay. And can we edit it even while the device is still booting up? Yes. It will not interrupt it. So essentially what happens is that whenever you click the run button, a new finished version of your app is transferred immediately to the phone, and it's waiting to transfer there until your device is booted up. So any edits that you make will not go into that version until you click the play button again. So it's completely safe to edit while your thing is uploading. So inside of our button right here, we're going to want to press enter to create a new line. And all that we're going to want to do, and I'm not going to explain the inner workings of how the XML works because that we'd be here for a long time. We're just going to want to say Android text. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Android on click equals finish note. Okay. And again, all that's saying is that we need to go to the onClick method called finish note to run some Java logic whenever the finish button is clicked. Okay. So now it's time to actually introduce you guys to what Java code is. So I'm going to have you guys go, if this file is not already open, you can find it again by going into your app folder, opening up the Java folder, opening up the topmost folder, and then double clicking on main activity. And that's where you can find it. Okay. So this is our Java code. And it might look a little bit daunting, even if you've written Java. Can you paste me add to XML? Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, let me paste it in here. You can just put this anywhere inside of the button tag. You don't have to put it in the same line that I put it, anywhere inside of there. Yep. And also you'll have the line, you'll have a red line underneath finish note. That should happen. So don't worry about that. Yep, no worries. So even if you've written Java before, this code might look overwhelming or a little bit confusing. And no worries, I'm going to explain what you need to know and what parts you can kind of ignore. So I'll just go line by line. At the very top, we have a package declaration, which is the same package that I briefly mentioned, I believe twice now. And you don't need to know too much about it. Just know that the line is there. And essentially, it says that everything in this folder is inside of this folder, inside of the package. And Android uses that when it compiles your app. Okay. And then you have some import statements, which just import libraries. Those are typical import statements that you would see in any language. Android imports 2 by default. You don't need to worry about what they are or what they do. They just enable your app to actually work from connecting the UI to the Java. And then right here is the real beauty of the thing and the part that you actually need to know. So you have your class. And you don't need to worry about what it extends, but you need to understand that what you did is you created a class in Java. And then every time that you create a file that's meant to be connected to a UI, it's going to give you this Oncreate method. And the Oncreate is kind of your, you can think of it like a main method, except it's a main method that stops running, but your app, it says your app install failed on the emulator. Okay, did it give any other detailed information, or did your console pop up at all with any specifics as to why it failed? You can install this of APKs. Oh boy, APK signature. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure why that would happen. I've never seen that error before myself. The 2 recommendations I can give you are to either, if you'd like to fix it right now and you really want to see the app run, you can hop into, what to do with the space in the path? Oh, you're the person with the space in the path. It shouldn't be an issue because it actually locates the C directory properly. But if you'd like to, I guess you have 3 options. You can either recreate the project without the space and see if that solves it. Or you can just follow along and copy all my code right now. And then at the end, you can go and do that and just copy everything over. Like just straight copy paste. It'll take you like 2 minutes and then you can see if it runs. You won't be able to run the code yourself, but every time I make a change, I'll be running it and I'll be showing you guys what the changes look like. So you're not going to be missing out on anything. Or if you really want to get it solved right now, you can hop into a breakout room and one of our tech staff will follow you in there. Hey, sorry about that. I didn't think that the space thing would cause an issue because it's locating to the right directory, but yeah. Okay, yeah, sounds good. So again, for your actual code, your Oncreate is kind of like a main in the sense that it runs when your program runs, but unlike a real main function that you'd see in most languages, it'll stop running once your UI is created. And what happens is that because this is our main activity, so you can think of it like a home screen, whenever the home UI is first loaded in, the code in this onCreate method immediately runs. So right here is essentially just saying this line, and you should never change this line. All that this line is really saying is call the onCreate method above me. So in like a class hierarchy, it's saying like just finish making the UI for me. And then right here, this set content view is pretty important. What it does is it says that this file, this main activity.java file, should be connected to the activity_main XML file. And there's some weird little syntax in here that's not too important, but the essentialness of it is that you're saying that this Java file should be connected so that whenever I make changes, it reflects in this XML file right here, okay? That is the main core of it. So now we need to go ahead and we need to actually create that finish note method, right? So we talked about this earlier again in the XML, where this has a red line under it because you're saying when the button is clicked, go to the finish note function and run that Java code, but that function doesn't exist yet. So we need to create it. We're going to create it just like a regular function in Java. And if you've never worked with Java before, it's very similar to other languages in the sense that we're just creating a public function that can be easily accessed. And we're going to call it finish note. And this right here might freak you out a little bit, but I'm going to create something. I'm going to pass something in called a view. And the first thing that you'll see before I even explain what a view is that this word is red. That means that we have to import a package that exists inside of the Android SDK, but is not inside of this file. And to fix that, you can very easily just click right next to the word, then hold down Alt and Enter, and you should get this drop up. And you're just going to want to press Enter on import class, and it's no longer red. Problem solved. And what a view is, you don't need to worry too much, but essentially it passes in the entirety of the UI so that you have the ability to actually edit it. And that's what allows the connection, again, between your front-end UI and your back-end Java code to actually exist. So now that we're in here, we're going to write some code. See you, Jeffrey. So the first thing that I'm going to show you guys how to do is just a simple console statement. So if you guys have ever worked with like C++ or any other languages like that, you'll know that your code, unless you create a UI, outputs to a console. And we can output to a console the same way here. Now, if you've used Java before, your first inclination is probably to like system.out.println, but that's not what we really want to do. Instead, we want to do, and I'll explain what this line means. What do I want to call this? Yeah, so the red view, and if you follow me on this step, you'll have the red log as well. So there's actually two ways to fix it. You can either hover over it and then click the import class button, or what I like to do is you can click right at the very edge of the word and hold down Alt and Enter, and then press Enter again on import class. And you'll have to do that for both the view and log, and you'll have to do that several more times today. So what this is this is a log statement. And all that means is that it prints to your debugging console. And this means that when the finish note thing is clicked on, it'll send something to your console that has a tag and then an associated message. And you don't need to worry too much about like the difference between a tag and a message. Just know that it concatenates them to make one string, basically. And then you're going to want to click the run button up here again. We're going to see something happen. So in order to open up your console, you want to click this thing that says 6:logcat in the very bottom of your screen. Mine's a little bit hard to see, but 6:logcat. You want to click on that, and you'll see this huge thing pop up with like a bunch of random statements that you don't know what any of them mean. Don't worry, that's to be expected. Then when you click the finish button, you'll notice, if you did this right, that somewhere here in your log, and again, it's very hard to see, but well, we got to scroll all the way back down. That's somewhere in here, you had a statement run that has the exact same tag that you specified and the exact same message that you specified. Okay? So that means that our button is now connected to our backend so that something happens when the button is clicked. But this isn't actually what we want to happen. Okay? This isn't the purpose of a finish button, to just run a statement in your console. The purpose of it is to actually save what is being stored in your title field and your body field, right? So in order to do that, we can create a connection, another connection between your front end and your back end. So if you guys will notice here on the XML file, we created something called, this is a body input. That's my variable name for it, but the actual name for it is a text input layout. And then inside of it, like I was explaining earlier, this is just the general framework for like where it's located. This thing called the text input edit text is where the actual text is typed into. So in order to extract the text from that and then empty it so that the next note can be entered, once the user clicks finish, we have to instantiate a variable of this type using the ID that we created earlier. So, okay, hold on. So what we want to do is we want to just type this right here and follow along with me. Okay, so I'll give you guys a second to copy this down. But as you copy it down, I'll explain that the purpose of this is that we instantiated or we created that exact text box, which is of the type text input edit text. We created a variable that represents it called name, right? Because that field, that top field is what stores our name. But the way that we actually connected to it is this little thing right here, this text, this title input is called a view, right? So we say, find that little component or find that little view by its ID. So that's the method that we're calling. We're saying, according to its ID, make name represent whatever this ID is. And the ID that I put here, title input, is my ID for whatever, for this component right here, for this text input layout. Right? So I'm just connecting them. So if you named your title input, if you name yours like title input 5 or whatever, you would put title input 5 right here. Your name should match whatever you have right here, okay? And the purpose of this is that you can connect, again, like I said, that specific component to some code. So now you have, so now you have some code that actually represents that specific component. We're gonna want to do this again, a second time over, for our body of our note. We'll call it body. And again, this has the exact same red line error. You can fix it the exact same way, either with the import class or the alt inter trick that I taught you guys. And then we're good. Now we've connected to that actual thing. And what we can do now is we can actually extract the text that was entered in there. And we can then set it clear again so that the user can enter a second note or a third note. And the way that we do that is now that we have these two variables, they have some methods attached to them, pre-written, given to us by Android, just like any type of component or view here would. And we can actually change what's inside of here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to work on emptying them. I'm not going to work on extracting the information just yet. I'm going to say name.clearFocus. I'm not going to pass in any parameters. And then I'm going to say name.setText. Right? And the essential bit of what this does is that clear focus says, and I'll actually show you what, I'll give you a concrete example. Focus means that you're focused in on this edit text field. So I'm focused in on this because I have the keyboard up. I can lose my focus by clicking the down button and clicking off of it, but there's no guarantee that if the user has this up and they click finish, that they would leave from this. So we want to clear their focus by forcing them out. And then we set the text to be empty so that if they have something here, when they click submit, this will again become empty because obviously they don't want to make the same note twice. So we got to empty the field for them, right? And then we just want to do the exact same thing for the body. Right? That's very simple. And I'm going to run my app again to show you guys exactly what happened there. So now I'm going to type in my first note. I'm going to say text here. And then when I click finish, notice how it crashes. 1 second, my bad. Okay, perhaps this will fix itself as we progress further. I might be missing something here that I'm just not paying attention to. So we're just going to keep progressing. So let's assume that this is working for a second. So now we're able to automatically close the actual text box once it goes away, right? So now we need a way to actually store this text somewhere. So like when you take a note, you want it to like be somewhere so that you can see like what it said, right? So in order to do that, oh, the variable that went into the parentheses, are you talking about this variable, like the title input and the body input? I'm not sure. We have text input edit. Yeah, this is the exact same thing. If you hover over it, it should, as long as it says the exact same thing that it says right here and you didn't make a typo and your capitalization is correct, it should work just fine. As long as you've also imported this. If you haven't, do the same thing that Ben said to import it. Yep, no worries. Yeah, because that's the exact same thing as this, so you need to have it imported. So now we need a place to actually store this somewhere in our device. And in order to do that, we're going to have to go back here and we're going to have to quickly create something as a place that we can actually store our real stuff, right? So what we need to do now is we're going to use a search bar. Why is this all messed up? My bad. So you're going to want to use a search bar to find a component called table layout. Okay, and all that this is it's going to be a nice little table where like in each row we can store like the content of a note. We're just going to want to drag it down right here. Okay, and it's going to create this, and we're just going to want to do some very basic constraints. So we're going to drag this thing up to the bottom of our finish button and click top to button bottom. And then we're going to constrain our sides and our bottom to the sides and to the bottom of the screen. And now we have a nice little table layout where we can store our information. And this next part is going to get a little bit weird in the code. If you guys are having trouble following along with me, how to open the virtual emulator at a Pixel 3 participate after I clicked run. You should have a run button up here. If the Pixel 3a, if you click run and it's not showing up like in your bottom taskbar or anything like that, that means that your code has a bug and it's crashing every single time that you run it. So if you click play and it doesn't show up, you have a bug. Right now, I currently have a bug in mine. It should be fixed as we keep going. So if your code looks exactly like mine, don't worry for right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the exact same thing that I did up here. I'm going to create a table layout. And I'm going to have to import it just like I did with the text input edit text. And all I'm doing is I'm making a variable that represents that table. I'm just going to call mine table. Right? And in order to find it, I need an ID to reference it. Okay? So my ID ideally would be table. So I need to set an ID for mine. I'll make mine table. And now you'll notice that the red goes away and it becomes purple or a different color depending on whatever theme you're using, which means that you've successfully connected this variable to the real table that we just created. Now this next stuff will be a little bit complicated, but essentially what I'm doing now is, if you guys remember, I referenced what a text view is earlier. A text view is just a place to store text, right? And I'm not going to explain how all this code works because I'm going to be here all night. But essentially, and I'll write this out and I'll do a tiny bit of explaining. you are going to store inside of a text view, or you're going to store inside of each row of the table individual text views. And those text views will hold different parts, or the name and the body of your note concatenated together. Okay. Yeah, of course. Thank you for coming here and checking it out. I appreciate that. And the recordings, it's usually up within a day, so you'll be able to watch it pretty soon. Did I fill that out wrong? I did, my bad. All right. I'll zoom out a little bit so that you guys can see this. And I will paste this into the chat in case you're feeling lazy and you don't want to write down exactly what I'm writing. But essentially what this block does, and I'm not going to explain the intricacies of it, is that it creates a new row, like I mentioned, and it sets the text of a text view inside of that row to a string version of whatever text was stored in the name field that the user wrote in, and then the text that the user stored in the body field. So like the actual body of their note. Okay. One second here. I believe I'm missing a parentheses actually. Yeah. If you're copying the code that I have on line 31, there's a missing closing parentheses at the very, very end next to the semicolon. My apologies about that. But yeah, now we should be able to run our app, and let's see. Oh, it's not even up on the screen, is it? It looks like we still have the same error that we did before. Give me a second to figure out why that's happening. Hold up. What? Hit another parenthesis on line 31. That might have been in reference to what I was talking about before. Yeah, you need 2 parentheses to close this off. Yes, sir. That's interesting. Why would that? Oh, okay. I see the issue here. Yeah, this one's this one's on me, guys. So I've made a little mistake here where I told you to name the variables wrong. So you guys should have this collapsing thing that we had right here before. The topmost thing should not be called title input. This should really, you don't really have a reason to name it at all. We'll just call it, I guess, title layout. And then we'll call this title layout 2. These don't really need to be named because they're never used, but you should have actually named the 2 things inside of the dropdowns. So this text input edit text, these are the ones that should have been named. So like my top one should say title input, and this bottom one should say body input. And give me a second here to see if that. And you'll need to come back here to your code and make sure that everything updated correctly. Yep, it works. So let me drag this over and show you guys. This is the working version, and I apologize for that bug. So just to recap in case anyone missed it, the names of these topmost things do not matter. The names of the inner ones matter. Okay, and then inside of your code, you want the inner name to be right here in your 2 lines. And again, that's because you're trying to, and I failed to see this because I was going too fast, you want to connect these variables to the actual box that holds the text. You don't care about connecting it to the layout that surrounds it because all of that is affecting the UI. You want to connect it to the actual little underline with the open field in it that contains the text, because that's what you need to care about extracting information from, right? So we can see here now that when I make a note title saying first note ever, then I say I need to do some stuff, you'll see that when I click finish, it'll create another note down here. Now our layout is a little bit off with our UI. That's not too important. That can be easily fixed. We are running a tad bit behind. So I'm going to skip over fixing that. You can very easily do that yourself if you care about how the UI looks. But yeah, that's actually it for the Android portion of this tutorial. To give a really quick recap of what I taught, I essentially taught you guys the very basics of how to create your own UI and how to drag and drop elements, and then how to create an on-click method whenever someone clicks a button, and then how to actually connect your backend to the front end and do stuff. So now you guys know that whenever a button is clicked, you can make a method like this, and you can create variables that represent fields in your UI, and you can extract information from them, and you can also add information to them. Like you can clear their focus, you can set their text, or like with the table, with this complicated statement, you can essentially set how it looks, like add a row, delete a row, things like that. And before we get on to the API portion of the workshop, if at any point anything that I'm saying is confusing, or you wonder like, how do they know how to do like set layout params, new table row dot layout params, table row dot layout params stat dash fill parent? Like, I don't memorize that kind of stuff, and I guarantee you that like most professional Android developers do not memorize that stuff. Android has really great autofill, which helps people remember stuff that they might forget, and also Android has a really in-depth documentation. And I will share with you guys a bunch of resources at the end of today, and that will be one of them, where if you guys, and you guys can also just use Google to find this, like if you want to create a table and you want to figure out like how to add a row to a table, like no one like remembers like, oh, this is how I exactly add a row to a table in Android Studio. You just kind of learn eventually that it's very easy to find information with Android. And that's the main reason why I said that we want to use Android, because it's so easy to find information. So like if I say how to add a row to a table in Android Studio, like a bunch of stuff will come up. And you see that I've clicked this link before because this is a link to the official Android docs. So like I looked at this and I figured out from what they gave me, like how to add a row to a table. So like, don't feel uncomfortable if you think to yourself, like, how can I ever memorize that? Like no one does. People just look up a lot of stuff and they eventually, it kind of just becomes like muscle memory, like certain parts, and then stuff that you forget, you can easily just go back and look up. Okay. And I mean, that's kind of true for like most of programming. And it's especially true for Android Studio because there's a lot of weird commands that you've never seen before and you'll never see in any other language or any other framework. Okay. So we're running about 10 minutes behind. So the end goal for this workshop was to also create an API where we can pull and save notes to. I'm not sure how much time we're going to have to actually work on that code, but I'd like to, at the very least, introduce you guys to the concept of what APIs are and just kind of give you guys some very basic information so that you know what an API is and how to use one. Okay, so API stands for Application Programming Interface. And essentially, it is what allows developers to interact and get information from different web services. And an API provides an interface or like a set system of function or data calls that you can perform to have access to data provided by a service. And that probably sounds pretty confusing, but a good way to think of it is like when a team has a database, and I'll show you guys some pictures to give you a better understanding in a second, but like, let's say that you have an app that's trying to pull data from a database. You don't actually go to that database directly and extract your information. There's an API that's almost like a glass wall between you two, where you can go to it and the API says, hey, you can call like these 10 functions to get information from the database. And you say, okay, this one looks nice. So I'm going to use its API or its list of publicly available function calls. And then I'm going to call one of them and the API will go to the database itself. It'll extract the information I need and it'll come back and it'll give it to me in some set format or some set data structure. Okay. And APIs are everywhere on the internet, even if you don't notice them. So like, for example, if you wanted to get like any of this information, like if you wanted to get the current weather data for any location in the world because you're building like a weather app, there are publicly available APIs that you can call from their list of publicly available functions where you can specify some parameters and you can get the weather 2 hours ago in Frankfurt, Germany, right? That's the general point here. And this is a very basic picture, and I'll explain what some of these terms mean. But the essential goal, like I said, is that you as the client, you create your app so that whenever a user opens up their phone, they can do stuff like send a request to the API by like pressing a button, and then your API goes to the database, it gets your information, it comes jogging back, and then it hands it off to the client. Okay. Oh. So to explain some of the terms on that slideshow, how the data is actually sent and received, there's a few different formats, but generally you send something called a request to the API. And that request can be in a few different formats. So you can do something like send a GET request, which tells the API like, hey, I want to read this data. So like this database has like a ton of data in it and I want to read from it. And like I want to extract some certain fields that like I can display on my app. Or you say like, hey, I want to send a post request to create some data. And get and post, and you'll learn this very quickly the more that you use APIs, are the two most commonly sent requests. There's put, patch, and delete, which I won't go into too much length explaining, but those also exist in case you need them. And you will need them from time to time, but get and post are the two most common. And then data is received typically in two formats. It's kind of been standardized down to this, either in the form of a JSON object or an XML object. And you'll actually notice XML is the same thing that was the underlying code to our UI. And that's because XML, which stands for Extensible Markup Language, it's a language that's very syntactically similar to HTML, but it's something where you can kind of create a system of tags according to your own specifications and then store data inside of those tags. That's the very basic breakdown of it. But more commonly, you'll see data sent back to you in the form of a JSON object, which I'm actually going to break down for you right now. So don't worry too much about how XML works. So how JSON data is sent to you, it's sent to you either as a gigantic list of like 20 different JSON objects, or you'll just get, like we have right here, one individual JSON objects. And each object is encoded in brackets. So you'll get like a long list in code of like a .json file, or you'll just get like a huge string of text that has like a bunch of brackets everywhere. And when you space it out like this, how it's supposed to be spaced, you'll notice that you have a bunch of data enclosed in one set of brackets, right? And then inside of there, we have different fields. So like right here, we have a field, called report request. And this field is actually a list. And you know that we have lists because we have these hard brackets right here. So it's saying I have this list that contains another object inside of it. An object is denoted by the squiggly brackets. And then inside of here, I might have another field called the view ID. And that field has like a string associated to it. And then we have another field that has a list that has another object inside of it. And so this can go really deep, like you can nest these super deep, but this is the general basics of it. And again, if it's really confusing, no worries. The point is just that you generally understand that you can send, get, and post requests So like send a request to either write information or to read information from a database by interacting with an API. And all that an API is like a set of functions to get some data from like a particular website, and it'll return it to you in this format. So now let's go look at some live JSON data, and let me pull this up. This is actually a server that I created. And all I did was I made this website right here, and this is how information is actually stored. What's up, Jeffrey? Welcome back. So the basics of this is that I have a document stored somewhere. If you're wondering where I stored it on a GitHub repo, but I have a document that is a JSON file and it has a bunch of data in it. But in order to get it, this link had to send a post request to get the raw information back. And you can see here, because I have these closed brackets, the data that I received back is a list of objects, right? And you'll see in here, I have 2 JSON objects because I have these squiggly brackets right here. Now I have one object that is a collection of 2 fields, a title for a note saying it's my first note, and then a body that says to buy milk. And I do that again. And we separate these notes by putting a comma we separate these objects by putting a comma in between them. And we do the same thing when we separate the fields. And you don't need to worry about like, oh, how do I syntactically write a JSON object? Like that's not too important of a skill to acquire, and you can always look that stuff up very easily. But this is the generality of how it's formed, okay? So now we have about 10 minutes, so it's not really enough to fully connect our app to an API. I was hoping for about 20 or 25. We're going to try to get as far as we possibly can in our code. And I'm just going to show you guys how to get your data, or how to get that particular data from my API. And I actually include a link at the very end in our list of resources that shows you how to create that list of data your own way. So instead of using my data, which is what we're all going to be using for right now, you could create your own data, and it's very easy to create it. Okay. So what we're going to want to do here is back here in our main activity. I'm going to close this here so you guys can see my code a little bit better. So like I said, our Oncreate is a place where we want code to run whenever the UI that is connected to it, which in our case is the main UI, it's like a home screen, is instantiated, right? So in here, we want to first kind of connect our app to the web. And in order to connect our app to the web, and I mentioned this way back in the beginning, if anyone remembers, I have to actually request permission from the device in order to get access to the internet. So before we can even make the API, we have to go into our manifest folder, which is where we request permissions. And usually you don't want to edit this because it's a very, very sensitive file, but I'm going to paste one line in here, and it's a little bit weird syntax, so I'll paste it in the chat for you guys. Just right underneath this line here that says package, you're going to want to press enter and then paste that. And again, you don't need to understand the syntax of it, but it's just saying that I would like permission to access the internet on this device, please. Okay, so now we can actually connect to the internet. And before we do anything in our Oncreate, all the end goal for this is that in our Oncreate, we just connect to the internet and we pull the information that we need, and then we populate our table on our phone with it, right? But before we can even connect to that, we need some pre-built system, right, that will allow us to actually connect to the internet and send, post, and get requests. Now, no matter what platform you do this on, so if you're making a mobile app, or if you're making a website, or if you're making like a desktop application, you need some sort of service provider. That's not the exact term, but that's a general way to think of it. You need a service provider who can connect you to that API and actually manage the sending of requests, because there's a lot of like lower level like language internet stuff that goes on, but you just need something that can handle that for you. Now, we're going to go in and we're going to edit our Gradle scripts. And I said that you almost never edit these, but we need to import, like I mentioned earlier, some library that exists on the internet that is not already inside of the Android SDK. So you have 2 build.gradle files here. You're going to want to open up the one that says module::app. Okay, and I'm going to paste these lines in chat for you because it's very important that you do not mess them up when you paste them in. Do I already have that one? Yeah, I do. Okay, you're going to want to paste these 2 lines in. Okay, And the libraries that these two lines import are, at the very top, we have this thing called retrofit2. And retrofit2 is the thing that is essentially our service provider that will allow us to connect to the internet and actually send these post and GET requests. These providers have different names based on the platform that you use. For example, there's several popular ones if you're making a website and you want to send API requests. One of the more popular ones is called Axios, and then there's several others. So things like that. And right down here, we have something called a converter-JSON. And this is actually sort of a mobile exclusive thing where when we receive the information, there's this thing called JSON, which works in Java, where it can convert your JSON document automatically into a class. And this is super cool because, and I'm going to go back to Chromie for a second. When you receive this block of JSON information, you have to parse through it in order to extract the fields that you want, right? And in every language, there's different ways of handling this. Because like I have to go down into this list. I have to be able to parse through a JSON object. And then I have to be able to actually locate the title field and then pull out the text that's there just to get the actual text for the title of my note. And in a more complicated JSON block of text, that can be really hard to get. So the cool thing about JSON, and this works again exclusively with Android, is that it will allow us to create a class that can represent a note. So right, like object-oriented programming, like we have a class that represents a note where all that it has is a title field inside of it and a body field inside of it. And we can pass it that class and say, hey, here's a bunch of JSON information. I know ahead of time that this JSON information is correctly formatted. So every time that you see a JSON object that has a name and a body field, yeah, just put those names and those body fields straight into the class. And now I'll have a bunch of instantiations or different objects of that class that I can actually extract that information from. And it's super cool and it's super easy to use. So now we're gonna have to go ahead and we're gonna have to create a few files here. And a lot of the code here will be a little bit confusing. And I urge you to just copy and paste and to not get too caught up if you don't understand it. Because the reality is that to make an API call on different platforms requires learning the different syntax for every platform. And you're never going to be able to do that. The point is just understanding how the connection is made and being able to look up and just understand the basics of how it works. Okay. So first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to right click on this folder. And we have about 5 minutes left, so we might not be able to finish, but you're going to right click on this folder right here. You're going to want to go to new. You're going to want to click on Java class. Okay. You're going to want to create something called retrofit client. Okay. However you spell it doesn't really matter. Just retrofit client. Okay. And then click enter. And now we have, excuse me, a regular Java class. This is not connected to a UI of any sorts. It's just a regular class that represents some sort of object, like you would do if you were doing regular Java object-oriented programming, right? So in here, I am just going to paste a bunch of code, and I'm going to have you guys copy it because we are running out of time. Oh, I'm sorry. In order for this code to work, you're going to want to click the Sync Now button in your top right. That just syncs your Gradle so it actually imports the classes for you. I forgot to mention that every time that you edit a Gradle, you have to sync it to actually import the classes that you just told it to import. So now you're going to want to copy paste this little block of text in and do that trick to import the two classes that are going to need to be imported up here that I taught you guys earlier. And I'm just going to walk through the basics of how this code is connected once we have everything down. So while you guys are doing that, I'm going to create another Java class. And this time when this thing pops up, I'm going to click on interface down here, okay? And we're going to call this get notes. Okay, so an interface called get notes. And if you've never worked with Java before and you don't know what an interface is, you can think of it like a completely abstract class, essentially, that needs to be implemented by something else. And then we're just going to paste actually 2 lines in here. You're going to have to import some stuff. And it's going to be these 2 lines. And the word note will have a red line under it, and that is supposed to happen, so don't worry. Okay. And then don't worry if you're a little bit behind and you're still copy pasting, no worries, the code is all in the chat. We're going to want to go ahead and create one last file called note, okay? And inside of this file is where we're going to create the actual class that represents a note that I mentioned earlier. So our JSON thing, our JSON class will be able to actually fill all of the JSON information into what we create this note object to be. And so if you guys have ever worked with object-oriented design before, if you've taken like AP Comp Sci in high school, you'll understand what this is. If you don't understand, don't worry. If you ever go about studying computer science, you will learn what object-oriented design is. But essentially, all I'm doing is I'm creating a very basic class with some getter and setter methods. So I'm just creating 2 variables with getters and setters to be able to actually edit them. That's all this is. I'm going to paste the code that goes inside of the note function in the chat. And if I'm going too fast, I apologize. If you'd like to see something again, though, feel free to just type in the chat, and I will go back and show it to you. But that should be pasted inside of your note class. Okay. So we have about 2 minutes left, and I'm going to very quickly explain how all of this code ties into each other, because you don't need to understand the syntax of it, because the syntax is different for every different provider that you use to connect to an API. But you need to understand the underlying basics of how the connectors work. Okay. So if we go back to our retrofit client file right here, you'll see that we have a base URL. And this is super, super important because somewhere on the internet is stored our actual information in the JSON file. And that is actually the exact URL that's up here, right? Because this is where it's currently being stored and represented, right? So if we go back to our code, notice how this base URL, if we look at the Chrome website, is actually the first portion before any of the slashes come. And that essentially tells retrofit, the thing that we're using to connect to the API, this is a URL that you'll be working on. So this is where you'll be sending your request to as a base URL, okay? And then all the code down here just instantiates an object that we can mess with. So we can actually tell it to send get and post requests and other types of requests. And then if we go back to getNotes.java, inside of here, you can actually, this is where we actually tell it where to go to send GET requests. So you'll notice that this is all of the URL that came after the base URL in my Chrome tab. So the fact that I'm putting @get here is just retrofit specific syntax that says, okay, so using the retrofit client on this base URL, if you ever ask me to perform a GET request, I'll go to the base URL and then I'll append to the end of it what's right here. Okay, and you'll notice that that's the exact URL that's here, and it'll extract this JSON object from it. Okay. And it's 9:30, so I will briefly say that we are missing a large chunk of code in our main activity. And this is in the Oncreate. This is the code that I was mentioning earlier, which will actually allow us to pull from here. And it'll actually go to retrofit and it will say, okay, it's time to perform a pull. And then it's time to take what's happening from this JSON object that we pulled and we moved into note classes. It's time to actually put all of that into rows. And that code, again, just like the rest of it, is a bit complicated. You don't need to understand the exacts of the syntax, but I will paste it in the chat for anyone who's curious. It's a bit long. But if you've kind of stopped following along, we became a little bit confused, no worries. Not only will the YouTube live stream be posted online, but I will also include at the end of the slideshow that we'll also be sharing with you guys a link to a GitHub with a fully working version of this. So you guys can go back, and if you're watching the live stream like later or something, you can watch or you can pull a full working version of this and understand exactly how the code is working. But this is the fat old block that does it, in case you're wondering. Oh, it cut off because I can't paste that much. Okay, we'll put it in the GitHub and I'll fully comment it so that you understand exactly what's going on. But yeah, that is about it for our workshop. Before you guys all leave, I'd like to quickly show you some resources that I've compiled that will be in the slideshow that is shared with you guys, along with the YouTube link later on. And this is just some resources that I think are very useful for beginner Android developers, like the official Android documentation, some courses that Android actually makes for you, so you can follow along and get specific instructions from them on like some very basic tools, a lot of which I just taught you. There's also an introduction to how XML works if you're curious about that. And eventually you'll need to learn it if you become pretty proficient in Android development. Also a nice blog post that really adequately explains how APIs work, and it's like layer by layer. So like if you understand the first layer of how it works and you want to learn more, you can go a second layer deep. And then I also put down here a link for making your own testing server that has instructions, just like how I made mine. And then also, if you'd like to learn more about creating your own database, so you can actually send API requests to a real working database, because the database I created was what we call a fake database. You can only send so you can only read data from it. You can't write data to it because it's not a real live database. If you'd like to create your own, there's something called Google Firebase, which is again maintained by Google. And it's a really simple and easy to set up databasing platform that I set up as a beginner with no understanding of how databases work at all, when I was very new to all this, in probably like an hour or two. And there's tons of resources online. And because it's a Google product working with another Google product, it's very easy to use inside of Android development. So it's really cool. So yeah, that about does it for us. That was a lot of information. Thank you for sticking with me if you stuck through for the whole thing. And again, just a quick disclaimer before we all head out. If anything that I said was really confusing, or you're a little bit stuck on it, or you're like, how do they know all of that syntax? Yeah, if you're stuck on any of that stuff, don't worry, because the point is that no one memorizes all this syntax. No one goes into making an Android app knowing exactly what they're doing. Even the people who are like paid to do this, who've been doing it for like a dozen years plus now. You're always gonna have to look up syntax, and the point is that you're always learning. So if it's overwhelming, just take it step by step. And again, I'd really recommend these Android development courses. I didn't use them when I was a beginner, but they're really, really useful. And if you don't like them, there's tons of information on YouTube about how to create your own app like for beginners. Like I myself learned by following this like random Indian guy's tutorial on how to create a WhatsApp clone. And I like never heard of his channel. He had like 200 subscribers. I was like, who is this guy? And I watched like his first 20 videos and I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed the workshop. That's really great to hear. That's about it for us. Friendly reminder, if you're interested in joining HackDavis, you can learn more about us by visiting hackdavis.io. Follow us on our social media links. Yeah, he is. And so follow us on our social media links. And that's about it. Thank you guys for coming out. Really appreciate it.